Hello, we're going to be doing American Revolution Part 2. It's still the same thesis. You can kill their soldiers, but the people you didn't convince. So we will be getting more into that. So the assignment questions, I'm actually going to give them to you ahead of time. I don't usually do that, but I would like for you to be thinking about these. So for what we're each fighting, the slave owner, Abigail Adams, reference a quote from her source. Felix reference a quote from his source. And then, usually you want to analyze, you want to say in your own words. And then these ones you definitely need to get from the lecture. So how did 3 of the following help the Americans to win? British arrogance. Give 2 examples from lecture in the video time. George Washington's strategy. Give 1 example from lecture in the video time. Again, if they are something from the internet, I cannot give you credit. I'm testing you on your ability to use lecture material to answer the questions, and most of you are doing that. And then Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, the idea that power is with the people. So no outside information is needed or encouraged. I just need you to think about that one point. Obviously on your own, if you want to go research Common Sense, it's pretty cool. It's about Enlightenment ideas, but I'm not looking again for an internet answer. I won't be able to give you questions if it's additional information. So I will give you these questions at the end of the video as well, but if you can think about them while you're watching the video. So let's talk about, again, continuing from video 1, part 1, toward independence. So shot heard round the world. What happened is General Thomas Gage tells the colonists, he's British, to disperse, and they do disperse, but somebody shoots a gun, somebody fires a shot, no one knows who did, and 269 British soldiers are killed or wounded, which is, pretty dramatic way for us to begin. The Second Continental Congress is when we decide, yes, we are at war and we need to figure out who our general will be. There's other people that are up, for nomination, whatever, like John Hancock, but in walks George Washington. He's 6'3". He's wearing his French Indian War uniform. He was not that great in the French Indian War, but as we can tell, as we're going to see, he was a fantastic choice. So I do want you to think about some of the following. You do not need to turn these answers in, but these will help you to answer the big questions. So they are different examples of some of the things I'm asking you. So one of the things that's difficult about teaching about a war is you can't teach every single battle, and try to choose some battles that are representative. So, for example, in Bunker Hill, the British made the militarily foolish decision to charge up Bunker's Hill, and so colonists were able to shoot them down easily. What do you think either side was thinking before and after the battle if they survived? So think about what mindset the British would have to charge up a hill. I mean, think about when you're a kid and you're playing, King of the Hill or whatever, and the disadvantage that the people charging up have. So the British actually were repelled twice, and then the third time they were able to conquer the hill. It is because the colonists ran out of ammunition. So very important is that this is not your typical war. Be thinking about, the disadvantages we had. So one of them, which is pretty interesting, is that we were a volunteer army. So take a look at this. Washington always had to be recruiting, always trying to win so that he could get other people to fight with him. Think about, somebody whose sister is getting married. I mean, he could just leave, for as many days as he wanted. It was very different than how the British were fighting. On top of that, another kind of really interesting point is that this is going to be the last racially integrated army until the Korean War, which is the 1950s. So we're talking several hundred years. 1/5 of both sides were African American. They could be slaves that were enlisted by their masters, or they could be people that were promised freedom that enlisted on their own. Anyway, so just another thing to think about is, what would a slave owner consider liberty? For what would he fight? And probably not for the freedom of his slave, but think about that. So this is a picture of a military, and you can see the African American on the left. And when you look at the percentages here, this just helps to understand the slave population. So look up in the north, it's 1, 2, 3, 6, 12, 7, 2%, 5%. So the north was very, very different than the south. The slavery looked a lot different too. There weren't really plantations. People might have several slaves, and they could be given certain freedoms like having their own job or whatever. But then look down into the South, even South Carolina, it was more African Americans than whites, which led to very strict rules. But again, our country is kind of starting to divide up that way. So think about Felix's petition. This would be something I need you to answer later. If you could read through that, what is he saying? And again, please don't go on the internet. Just look at the source, because if you have outside information, I can't give you credit. So Thomas Paine and common sense, this would be something else to think about. Thomas Paine argued that the power lay with the people. It's very much Enlightenment ideas. Why do you believe Common Sense by Thomas Paine was so popular with Americans? It's kind of a common sense, literally, answer. So this is Thomas Paine. Remember the ladies, these would be other people that are arguing for independence and freedom. So Abigail Adams, please take a look at her source. Excuse me. So it's pretty cool what she's arguing. She's John Adams, our second president's wife. Of course, there's no presidents yet. But how is she using the language and the spirit of the revolution here? And then we do get the Declaration of Independence. So July 4th, as you guys know, would be the date that it would be, authorized. So now we're going to talk about why Washington was a good leader and about the arrogance of the British. So these would be the examples. You could use some of them. So Washington was surrounded in New York. New York was loyalist, meaning there were 1/3 of the country or the colonies, whatever, were loyalists, meaning they were on the British side. 1/3 were for the revolution, and 1/3 were neutral. So think about New York. It's very, money oriented. We've talked about. So remember the Navigation Acts, and think about why would some choose to be loyalist to England? What would be the advantages? So anyways, Washington was surrounded in New York. The British said, we expect that you will formally surrender tomorrow morning, so come in your official uniform. But instead of doing that, Washington had the fires burning in the camp, so it looked like there were still people there, and he started sending his men across the river. He was the last man on the last boat. So think about what that says about him as a leader. So when the British came to accept the surrender, what did they find? An empty campsite. So the main thing with Americans, we do not play by the rules. So here are going to be 3 stories that you can use for the arrogance. So the first one is General Rahl. And General Rahl was Hessian, Hession. So the British were able to hire mercenaries or soldiers for hire. So General Rahl there's 2 stories about him. Either he was dancing or he was playing chess, but I like the dancing one better, so I'm going to use that one. But anyways, General Rahl was dancing at a ball. He also was having an affair with one of his officers' wives. So he was thinking about some different stuff than the war. He was dancing. There was a messenger that came that said that the Americans are coming, and the person who answered the door went to tell General Rahl. General Rahl said, I don't want to hear the message right now. I'm too busy dancing. So that he says, give me a note on what's going on. So the messenger went and got the note, and the next morning, General Rahl was dead and had never read his note. And 1,200 Hessians were taken prisoners. So again, think about that for the arrogance. The next one is the slow General Burgoyne. So usually, if we're face to face, I can draw a picture. But what happened is the Americans were up in, let's say, the upper right-hand corner of a piece of paper or whatever of the country, and General Burgoyne was supposed to come around the top on the from the left to the right. He had 23 miles to go. With him, he had 8,000 soldiers. What was very normal is to have 2,000 women and children with him, but he also had 30 carts of personal belongings and several just with champagne. So the Hessians, he's also Hessian, and the British thought that the country people would be for them, but they were very wrong, and the farmers in the rural areas were burning down bridges. The British Hessians, whatever, the Hessians were finding coyotes, things that they hadn't seen, in a deep forest, they hadn't seen in England and, whatever, Germany in hundreds of years. So it ended up taking 1 mile per day, so 23 days to get to the Americans, which was no longer a surprise attack. Philadelphia is another little very short story, but what happened there is usually, when a country attacks another country's capital and conquers it, the conquering country wins. Well, we said, oh, Philadelphia was our capital. No, we've changed, we've moved, and we did that several times. So it's kind of like trying to find Jello, trying to hold on to Jello. Of course, there's always ups and there's downs. So Valley Forge and Benedict Arnold were huge downs, low points for George Washington. Valley Forge, the British had taken over the people's houses, so our people and our soldiers were out in these, cabins in Valley Forge, and I just remember from 5th grade, which was many years ago, seeing pictures of, movies of soldiers with no shoes and barefoot and, bloody feet and whatever. So it was a real low point. Benedict Arnold, you might have heard that name before. This is him. So he was what's called a traitor. He was very good friends with George Washington. He was passed over for promotion several times, and so he went to the English side. So again, this was a real low point for Washington. This is what the British thought of us, pretty, low attitude. But the British do start wondering, after it's been some years, that maybe they're cutting off the head of the golden goose, meaning us. You can see the golden eggs down below, but if you cut off the head, no more golden eggs. Also, just like any war, the people start getting pretty tired of sending their men abroad. And the soldiers, the British soldiers, had to pay for their own, haircuts. Remember that story from earlier? They had to pay for their food. And here's this woman, she's pregnant, she's got all these kids, and they're begging the dad, please don't go. So, morale was going down in England for sure. So something you need to know about George Washington with his strategy, which relates to the question, is he would have liked to play the lion, but he learned to play the fox brilliantly. So what do you think that means? Just to keep in mind, out of 9 battles, George Washington only won 3. So, it's, kind of miraculous that we won the war. Okay, so Benjamin Franklin did go to the French. The French loved him. And the French had beers with his name on it. They put his picture up in their walls. But when he went, he chose to dress very simply, unlike the story about the Parliament, almost as a frontiersman when he approached the French about helping us. Why did he feel this would be a successful method? So this could also go into the strategy. This is a picture of what he dressed like. Think about what the French would not want, right? They're enemies with the English, right? Okay, so the French do come over. And this is one of the gentlemen that came, which I just love his name, Marquis de Lafayette, Marie Joseph, Paul Yves, Roch, Gilbert de Motier. So he became kind of a rock star. If you can go to New York, you could see where he used to live. But he was very good friends with George Washington. But of course, the French also sent over, major generals. So what happened with our victory is Count de Grasse was down in the Caribbean. He's French. And he came up and was able to surround Cornwallis, Lord Cornwallis, who was British, and they had a siege, and they surrounded them, and finally the British surrendered. So when George III, he consoled himself, he said, America seems to be a land of knaves, in other words, like low-class people. In the end, perhaps it is best that its inhabitants become aliens to this country. When he does make the announcement about America winning, he chokes on the word independence. We are the first nation to make ideology the basis of our existence. Okay, so think about, how does this quotation help to explain the American victory, which is the thesis we've been going over. Okay, and this is Yorktown, where we won. So we're going to talk for a minute about women, which is really important for later when we talk about women's rights. So let me just go over a couple of these. So women were economic contributors. They contributed by boycotting, by having, little riots. They spun home cloth. That was a big patriotic gesture, so we didn't need to rely on British cloth. They were temporary war widows. In other words, when the husband left, they were in charge of the businesses and the farms and whatever, which of course they always had been involved, but they were, in charge. They were travelers with war, like I said. So for every one man, there'd be 10 men, there'd be one woman. So she'd cook, clean, carry water. And they were activists. So a couple of people that are pretty interesting. Molly Pitcher, she was fetching water. Her husband was wounded, so she kept fighting for him. There's another woman, Deborah Sampson. She actually was masqueraded as a man, Robert Shurtleff, Shurtleff. She enlisted. She was the only woman to serve in the Revolutionary War. She was found out. Later on in 1838, she was given a full military pension. In the Civil War, there's going to be many women, and also the Gold Rush, many women that act as men. So anyway, Deborah Sampson is the one that she stands out in this. Okay, so 6 groups that were involved. We usually watch The Patriot, a bit of it, and we talk about 6 groups that were involved, the British attitude, American style of fighting. So think of women, ministers, African Americans, French, farmers, lower class. British attitude, of course, arrogance, American style of fighting, guerrilla. And then we go back to our thesis. So these would be the 2 questions I'd want for you to answer. Worth 15 points. And again, if you use outside sources, I can't give you the credit that you deserve. Or you can't give you the credit. Yeah, you need to go for my lecture. Okay, thanks very much.